Hello and welcome. Here we are at episode number 6 of Fablebreakers. This week, our guest is my friend Jeremy Loomis, an author who isn't afraid to take risks with what he creates.
Jeremy is going to tell us about some of the ways that he challenges himself, as well as expound on his philosophy that creative block doesn't necessarily have to be a roadblock.
My name is Jake Romano,
And I'm Carly Racklin.
and we're here to take the myth out of making something meaningful.
It was so accurate to that day. Like, I was doing laundry and there was laundry on the floor and my foot got caught and I kind of tripped and I don't know what happened. All I know is that my toe hurt really bad afterwards and I was like limping everywhere. And I'm just a big baby and I'm not a medical professional, so I hurt myself and I'm like, everything's broken, I'm going to die.
Yeah, no, sometimes I haven't been to a hospital. I've never broken a bone, never been to a hospital as far as I can remember, so.
I've never had to go to like the emergency room or anything, and I'm afraid of that day, but also I just like can't stand to be an inconvenience, so it's just like, oh, I'm fine. No one has to take me to the hospital. I don't want to bother.
You're like bleeding out. I don't want to be a burden.
It's like that, the Monty Python with like that.
Yeah.
It's merely a flesh wound.
You haven't got any arms left.
Come here, I'll bite your legs off.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
All right, we ready to start?
Yeah.
All right, so Jeremy, I went over this with you a little bit, but I am going to start by reading a quote from an old blog post of yours, which you wrote a few years back. I think it was probably 2 years, right? 2 or 3 years that you were doing the about writing.
That sounds about right.
Okay. So I'm just going to read it off, and maybe we'll call this the fable for this episode. Maybe we won't, but either way, we're going to get to the bottom of this by the time we're done here. So we're going to see where it goes. All right, here it is. This is the quote from your post. Getting stuck should not be part of the creative process. In fact, it's not part of the creative process. Getting stuck means the process has suddenly halted. Although the process may involve taking a break from writing to do research, it won't involve you getting lost or becoming estranged from your own story idea. That's the quote as a whole. And my question to you, in regards to like the topic of art block, creative block, and writing block, has your perspective changed at all now from when you wrote that? And if not, how are you reconciling some of the challenges that you've encountered now that you're writing in the present? Is there anything different about your thinking? Because I know that you expressed to me at least that that you have had what someone might call creative block recently. Has your perspective changed at all on that?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked. So what I was intending to clearly say in that post, and what I think my perspective hasn't really changed about, it's not that writer's block or creative block doesn't exist. It's that I wasn't acknowledging it as part of the creative process. It may happen while you're trying to go about the creative process, but it's not creative, so it's not part of the creative process.
That makes sense.
That's the heart of what I meant. I can see where that wouldn't necessarily come across on first reading, especially. But the thing is, creative types, like if we would all fit under the category of right brain people, then, that's one way to categorize all of us. But within that, we all work in such very different ways. It's so nuanced. The way a person will make a story or a piece of art is going to come from who they are, and the obstacles that they have in making that are going to be, pretty individualized too. The problem is, if any one person has, let's say, 3 obstacles in front of them in their creative process, it doesn't always mean that the first obstacle is going to be the same one of those 3 for each person. So there could be like a main thing that you might have to get over that maybe isn't a big thing for me, and another thing that you wouldn't have even think could be a significant problem that really stops me in my tracks.
Yeah, everybody's different. Everybody has their different kind of creative block. Yeah, I do agree.
It makes total sense to me, your idea of like writer's block meaning the process, or it being not part of the process, because when you get blocked, the process literally stops. Like you stop making
Sure.
things. And you use the phrase getting lost or becoming estranged from your own story. And that was really interesting to me because, at least in my case, the way I work, there are a lot of times when I have to step back from the draft or whatever it is, because I can get really, really hyper focused on it.
Mm.
And so it really helps me and is a good part of my process when I step back and reflect on everything that I've done so far. And for me, that's definitely a part of the process because I'm still contributing to the overall work. But so that stepping back and reflecting, when you take it too far, it becomes stagnation and it becomes writer's block. And I think that's an important distinction to make. And that's something I do all the time because if I notice something isn't working for me, if I notice that I'm getting creative block, I have to take a step back and think, why is this happening? What am I doing that's not working? How can I kind of circumvent this issue? So I don't know. I think it's really nuanced, like you were saying.
That thread is interesting because I remember there was an interview. I'm going to bring her up again because she's one of my favorite artists. But Lois, she was interviewed by Chris Oatley, and at least I think it was that interview, and she talks about art block a lot because it's something that she has, and we use art block, creative block, writer's block. I'm going to use them kind of interchangeably here. But and there's something she said about doing like visual research. So when she's like just sketching and stuff, sketching plants, sketching or sketch, sunsets, whatever, just drawing from nature. Where actually, she said that when she does too much of that, where she's doing kind of this research and, downloading visual information into her head on how things look, that actually causes burnout for her. And that's something that I found too, is that when I take too much, when there's no substance to the material, it's just kind of all aesthetic. It's all, I don't want to say empty, but it's just all visual. It's not like there's no substance to it. That's when that actually causes burnout, and that because there's no like ideas backing, or themes or concepts backing things up. It's just you're just kind of downloading information, and that can cause burnout. That can cause artist block. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, taking a step back too. Like, yeah, that's important. That's the part. Research is part of the creative process, but stopping shouldn't be. That's really interesting. That's kind of a thread between writing, and art as well too. Yeah.
And the long fiction can be intimidating.
Yeah.
It's because it's long and you have to write the whole thing. I think quite a lot of the intimidation factor is because of trying to pursue the drafting process as one long slog. Mm-hmm. Because you see, oh, cool, I have 12% of the first draft done, and I feel completely spent. I feel whooped. I feel like this was my idea, now it's bested me. Because 4 years ago, I drafted my first novel. Now there's a few hundred pages of details, and then I pretty much gave up on it and said, I'll do it someday, but it's like just this insurmountable thing. You get to where you're distracted by the details, not sure whether you should be editing sentences or tossing them out and choosing a new focus for the story. What I've been doing, and this is so refreshing, is to re-outline things. And I don't mean like bullet points. I mean re-outlining in narrative form. Mm-hmm. If you were to take your story and just describe it to a friend, tell them what happens, what details could you leave out and still tell the story? The great thing about that is that you can actually plan your story start to finish without it taking forever, maybe without it even taking a whole weekend.
It sounds like in working through all these like details and things, getting lost in the small details. Something we've talked about before is like the pressure we put on ourselves to make something perfect and to make something meaningful every time we put pen to paper, and that's for artists and that's for writers too. But it's a flaw that, and I will call it a flaw because it's something that does prevent us from creating. I think it's a flaw that almost all creative people wrestle with at some point, and if you don't, you're not human, because we want to make something beautiful and we want people to recognize the work, and we want it to make a difference, and I think that's really noble. But again, that pressure we put on ourselves to get all the little details right and get everything perfect, that can again lead to burnout when we fail, or even before we even try to create it all. Do you think there's like a balance we can kind of find between creating freely and consistency without that pressure and that burnout? Is there a way we can kind of make that happen or work towards that?
I think there is, actually. And this goes back to a little of what we already talked about. And it's actually part of the answers in the question, because you were asking, there can be a tendency to want to make something excellent every time we put pen to the paper. And I think that's half of the problem. I'm going to introduce something here that I've come to believe, and I could, maybe people who work differently than I do wouldn't necessarily see it this way, but I think the creative process is translation work. I think fiction is translation work. I think art is translation work. You are taking an experience. You're taking something you've either seen in your head, and you're making a way for somebody else to see what you saw or to feel what you felt.
It's from getting it from your head to your hand, kind of. When you're. That's the same thing with drawing too. Like when you have an image in your head, and you have to kind of get it to where your hand is going to do what your head wants. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's where I think the heart of it is. Because perfectionism hijacks that train, then I start to associate my craft with something I don't enjoy.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And really, I don't need to make something great every time I write or draw, but I do need to make something I enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I liked a very simple quote by David Lynch. He said, "You do the work for the doing, not the fruit."
Yeah.
You're saying, you never know if it'll be, you make the thing, you never know if it'll be well received. You don't know if you're going to make a hit show.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know how it'll be received. But he said, if you don't enjoy the doing, then do something else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that has to be a discipline. That part of it has to be a discipline. You need to allow yourself to sit down and doodle whatever is an expression of what's actually stirring within you. If your heart and your head are not in the game with your main project just then take a break from it to do whatever's near and present.
It gets hard too, because I think, and I like to throw all my problems on the internet, but a lot of, at least in my past, my problem with art block and stuff has been, and this need to make something perfect has come from a place of, I need to post this online, like that. There's like this little voice in the back of my head, and I know it sounds silly, but like it really is a problem where, as I'm creating something, I'm thinking, who's going to be looking at this? Which social media platforms am I going to be sharing this on? And there's that little bit of pressure there, and that maybe that comes from it doesn't necessarily come from the internet. That's just one way that it kind of comes through. But there's that little bit of pressure there where, instead of thinking necessarily about the finished product, I think I should be taking the process as kind of more of a that's the fun. The fun can be in the process. At least it used to be more. I think when I was younger, before I even had like Facebook or any of these other things where I could post stuff, it was, I would sit down and even maybe when you guys were younger and you were writing, and it was just for the fun of it. Like you had that image, like you said, in your head, and you just felt this need to get it out, and that was kind of I don't want to use the word fun, but the process was more enjoyable, as opposed to this finish. And now that we're older and we know that people publish books and print books and do these bigger projects are more official, we put pressure on ourselves to put a cap on it at the end and be like, and all we think about is putting that cap on the end and finishing it, whereas we do grow a lot through that process. Something that I've done, started to do recently, it's helped me with that whole process thing, and kind of pushing back against this thought that everything needs to be perfect. It's helped me a lot, is that when I open my sketchbook, instead of, well, I used to just start drawing, and if I didn't like it 2 minutes in, I would physically rip the paper out of my sketchbook, crumble it in a ball, and throw it across the room. And
Yeah.
I don't let myself do that anymore. And I talked about this with you before, Jeremy,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
I think that's really dangerous because we're like cutting our brains off mid sentence. We're not letting
Mm.
ourselves complete a thought. And so now what I do is, even if I don't like necessarily where something is going, I force myself to finish what I'm drawing, to complete the thought. And usually 90% of the time I'm not necessarily happy with it, but I'm like, you know what, I feel good. I finished this. This is done. I completed the thought. And I think after so many years of cutting my own brain off mid sentence in a way, it's taking me a while now to kind of let myself kind of finish those thoughts, and I am starting to enjoy the process more. So maybe that's part of it too. Is kind of the answer to art block or a creative block is to stop cutting ourselves off mid sentence, and just taking that pressure off. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can add to that. Don't don't um don't cut yourself off from the drafting process by trying to start the editing process early, because that's what's happening when you second guess yourself. You are editing things you haven't even drafted yet.
Yeah.
You're deciding something's not good enough to try before you even try it, and that gets it stops up the well. You have
Yeah.
to prime it again, and you might not even be willing to prime it again if you do that enough times.
Well, Carly, you just started recently. I think it's a big milestone because I've never gotten this far. But you just started recently editing one of your, or at least showing one of your stories to friends. I guess, right, for editing purposes, or
Yeah.
so how has that been, for you in that way? And because that's like a big step to, like you said, to get to that editing process, and to get to that point where you kind of let your brain again finish the thought to the point where you can take it as a whole and edit it. Because you just started doing that recently, which is kind of cool. I think that's awesome.
I actually kind of started the editing process on it in an interesting way. Actually, it was Tori, one of our previous
Mm-hmm.
guests. She gave me really cool advice that I tried because I am really conscious of my process, and when I'm doing something and if I feel like I'm heading towards writer's block, if I can kind of tell that something isn't working here, I just really like to hear about the things other people do and their processes. And so when I finished the first draft of this novella, I was not sure how to approach editing it because I'd never finished something that long. The advice Tori gave me, she told me it was something she had done, that she read her entire first draft, no edits, aloud to someone,
Oh.
Hmm.
and had her friend give her comments. And I was like, that is terrifying, but I did it. And it was so wonderful and fun. And
Awesome.
It must have been really like freeing,
yeah,
kind of.
we get so like self-deprecating, and so like I was saying, like, okay, you're gonna get to hear all the terrible first draft writing, haha. And like even as I was reading it, there were moments when I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I wrote that. Like I'm taking that out immediately. But it was really helpful, and just to do that thing that I had never thought of doing at that point in the process, because I have a lot of experience with writer's block, and it's really discouraging for me. So I get really interested in just like trying new things to help me get around the beginnings of writer's block, just because I feel like if I can do new things, then it opens up new avenues for creativity, and just it allows me to get new ideas and get a head start on the process that I was so afraid of.
Yeah. Tori's the best.
Yes, she is.
That's an excellent way to kind of navigate through that problem of not wanting to take that next step.
Yeah, like I could show the horrifying first draft to like one of my best friends, someone I know who isn't gonna like
Yeah,
judge
yeah,
me
yeah.
terribly for the fact that like, oh, this character does something really cheesy and embarrassing. And then I took her feedback and went through it a couple times on my own until like it got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm comfortable with people who maybe aren't like my best friends seeing this. Yeah, because I'm in general really sensitive to to writer's block, and I think I kind of had like a turning point. It was last year, actually, like probably almost a year ago exactly. I wanted to spend the summer finishing the first draft of this book that I've been writing since high school. I honestly started writing the book because my friends were writing books and I was like, oh, I want to do that. So like I started writing not knowing how to write a good story at all. I just did it because I could. So the beginning of this thing is like a mess. And I had the time, I dedicated the time to try to write it, and it was just I didn't like the words weren't there. And I got super frustrated and I tried and forced myself to get words on the page and there just weren't any. And it made me really depressed. And I was really scared of like wounding my process. And I was really afraid of trying to force myself to work on it. And like you said, Jeremy, the idea of making yourself do something that's not fun.
Yeah.
And looking back now, I think most of the reason it didn't work then was because it just wasn't the right project for me at that time. And it was really hard for me to reconcile that with myself because I could say, like, I love this story so much. I love everything about it, but I still can't write it. And it's just maybe because it wasn't the right time for me. And that was a really hard thing to realize. And I didn't realize it then in the moment. It took me months to realize, like, it wasn't me. I wasn't the thing that was broken with doing that. It was just the story wasn't the thing that I needed to do. And I guess in one of Jeremy's blog posts, he compares inspiration in writing to a wardrobe that leads to Narnia. So this really like sad metaphor I made to myself. To me, writing felt like a house I was locked out of, or a house that I lost the key to or something. In both of those cases, it's not the writer, it's not the person who's trying to get into the house, it's not the person who's trying to get into the wardrobe that's broken. It's the process or the thing itself that is keeping us out of it.
Right. It's not like you have a broken leg that's preventing you from going into the house. It's the house that is the problem. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And so with me, with this book, the book was the problem. And it's taken me like this long, like a year, to realize that that's what was going on. So I don't know, the process can be really, really challenging. And especially with creative people, because we tend to be really sensitive, like we'll see something not working and we think it's us that's not working.
Yeah, yeah.
And that
True.
it's our fault.
Yeah. I want to ask, I guess I'll ask both of you. Because you seem to have a lot more experience and probably, I guess, you probably wrestle with this on probably a larger scale than I have. Do you think that, at least in your case, Carly, like maybe creative block, writer's block, artist block is kind of the universe's way of telling us that maybe the story is not meant to be? Like,
Yes.
do you know what I mean? Like,
for me, I definitely think that the writer's block I ran into was probably, if we want to have another really silly metaphor, me running headfirst into, I don't know, a stop sign or something, a sign telling me to turn back, but instead of reading the sign and understanding why it was there, I just kept running headfirst into it and wondering why it was so painful.
you're like standing there yelling at the stop sign, like, "What's wrong with you? I want to go."
Yeah, so I definitely think when we come to places like that where everything isn't working, we need to look at it as a sign that something isn't working, and we need to step back and think about why. And then maybe we have to, reconsider our priorities, and maybe, like I had to realize, this isn't the thing that we need to be working on now. And I went to school and things were going on, and then my main project basically became this novella that I finished. Like, I'll do one more metaphor and then I'll stop. I promise.
Carly, at the end of when we're done, I want to get all of your metaphors that you've ever made and just make like one of those, just have them all lined up.
If you think I use a lot of metaphors now, you should read my writing.
I can't wait.
But so like the book I was trying to work on writing that felt like a house I was locked out of. Maybe I was just trying to get into the wrong house. And this novella was the right house. I had the key to that one. Or maybe I was just trying to get into someone else's house. But
Jeremy is really big into the process, and My turn for a metaphor now.
Yay!
I always I kind of compare the creative process a lot of times to like when a duck is on a pond and it's going down to get a fish or something or whatever ducks go down there for, and they're like paddling their little ducky feet, and all you see on the surface is just like little bubbles or like little ripples, but really there's so much energy that's being expounded underneath the surface. So, you know, even though people are just seeing this little tiny finished piece, or every once in a while they see something that you finished, like there really is so much more that's going on, and all that stuff that's happening below the surface, that's for us. That's not necessarily for, you know, for the people who are reading our you know, our stories or seeing our art. There's so much more that's happening underneath, and like I said, like that's for us. And that time you had, Carly, when you were kind of trying to discover, you know, what was happening, you know, how to get into the house, like that time was for you. That wasn't really for anyone else. And now, like, here you are, you know, you're editing your novella, and that's so exciting, you know, and maybe you wouldn't have gotten to this place if you hadn't tried to bust into someone else's house. So now you're really good at breaking into people's houses, so that's great.
Wow. Don't take that out of context, internet.
Yes, kids. Home invasion.
Home
Thumbs
invasion. The home invasion.
You touched on something that I think is very important, and I wouldn't have thought to bring up on my own. There's a very real, you know, it's a real thing to sometimes have a story that is a story for you to write. And when you come up with the idea for the story, you're not in the same season of life as you will be when you're prepared to finish the story. Which that's definitely been the case for me with the novel that I'm working on. And you know, I mean, as much as I was happy about having a complete first draft of something that was long fiction, I'm looking at pretty much a full rewrite.
Really?
I know the story better than I did before, but there's so much to do in order for it to be the right story. That definitely happened to me, where I thought, yes, if I just plod along, I'll get through this thing. But there's a lot involved to make a story, and to make it with some authenticity so that the characters are believable, what they go through will ring true with the people who read it. It has to be real.
Yeah.
You know, you're writing from what you know, and sometimes what you're reaching for is something you don't know yet. Or maybe it's something you're in the middle of and haven't come out the other side yet.
Yeah. Something that Tori was mentioned a while back, which I always kind of hold on to a little bit, is she mentioned, wow, how many times have we quoted Tori in this episode?
Almost more times than you've quoted Jeremy Loomis.
Well, you have to have an episode before we can quote you, bro. No, but she's mentioned, especially with longer projects, is that you have to kind of trust your future self to finish the work when you start something. And I think about you, Jeremy, with your long project, because I think you mentioned that it's like, I don't know, man, it sounded long, but you have to like trust that you're going to get it done, and that there's going to be value, you know, in it still in 10 years when you finish it. Or however the heck long it takes.
Or however long it takes for me to find a literary agent.
There you go. Oh gosh.
Yeah, that's a separate episode. That is not for now, right?
Jeremy, I want to talk a little bit about your comic Quiet House, which I was a huge fan of.
I was so glad for your support during that process.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it, because I don't know, I like comics. I've always loved like graphic novels and stuff, and web comics in particular, since they're so accessible and, you know, they're just very easy to get to. I love them. So I like that you were updating it every week. There's always that kind of fun thing where you kind of wait every week for a new strip to come up. So web comics are cool. I guess give us an overview of Quiet House if you can. Give us the condensed version without spoiling anything.
Yeah. Okay. So Quiet House is. Let me see if I can do this super condensed.
Go ahead.
And outdo myself to the point where you have to say, "Oh, could you actually make that a little longer, Jeremy?" I'm afraid you were too concise for us. It is a story about the parent and child bond, and it is also a story about unresolved baggage.
Mm-hmm.
Ta-da.
Oh, okay. All right, then. Next question. No, the interesting angle I think was that it was very symbolic.
Super
At least
symbolic.
that's the way I saw it, and you have themes and emotions and even relationships. Like I feel like the relationship of fatherhood to son was kind of embodied in these two characters. Like they were the relationship, if that makes sense. And then you had another character, obviously Apathy, who was you kind of took...
I wonder if anybody didn't get that it was
Oh,
Apathy.
I think so. What was the character's name? It was
Happity.
Happity. I totally got that.
No, I just know that, like, some things, like, even for me, some things won't jump right out at me. If I had been the reader instead of the writer.
I totally got it. And especially in the way that, the character talked and moved. And and there was something interesting about how you got the way that you took Apathy, the concept, and made it into, like, a character. And that was...
Right.
And then you can kind of do some more interesting things with that, like how do we defeat apathy? How do we just open the door and let it leave? Do we have to physically take it and haul it out the door? Like things like that were really interesting to me. So I loved it. It was so cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so much fun to make. And it was and kind of on the subject of creative block, I've tried to start things before, and I thought that I, knew where I was at. I thought that I had the whole thing planned out, or thought, oh, well, if I get started, I'll be able to keep this up. And it didn't work out. And sometimes I'd promote a thing online when it wasn't even ready yet.
Yeah.
And then the thing would kind of just peter out. With Quiet House, I was like, okay, probably 2 or 3 years ago, I had the idea. And it got to a point where I was like, okay, yeah, okay, I have about half the story figured out. I think I'll give it a little more development, and then I think it'd be safe to start it. If it's just a single page a week, I think I can keep up with it consistently for once in the midst of everything else going on in life. And, you make a black and white webcomic 1 page a week. Mm-hmm. It turned out to work for me.
Yeah.
And it was really rewarding because I've started a lot more than I've finished.
Yeah.
And you have to start training yourself in that way as an artist and as a writer to, like you were saying with your sketchbooks, to finish what you start. The follow through is just really, it kind of helps your backbone as a creative person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so I will definitely include a link in the description to that, if you still want to share that with people. I know you mentioned that you were going to rework it, actually, at some point, and I'd be interested to see
I would like to.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a good read. It's pretty short, so if anyone is listening and they'd like to take a look at it, we'll definitely include a link in the description there. You mentioned that you had a project a little while ago that you started that you didn't finish. Or that you did finish, but it petered out. You like to challenge yourself, Jeremy, in really interesting ways, I think, with your writing. And you do writing experiments, like The Bonding Agent, which was...
Sure.
Was it, like, officially what you'd call a novel? I don't know what, like...
It was too short to be a novel. It was a novella.
Well, it was also an audiobook. Which was really cool. Other times you collaboratively tell stories. I remember I did this with you probably a couple years back where we did like a little comic back and forth. I don't know, give us some thoughts, some practical ways that you challenge yourself as a writer. I've also seen that you, and just to add, I've also saw on your blog a while back, along with the other post that we mentioned, you have like a writing schedule, or you had a writing schedule at some point that was pretty like rigorous. And it was literally like, it looked like it was hour by hour.
Wow.
Do those things like, are you still holding on to those things? Do you still challenge yourself? in that way.
I know what you're talking about. I was thinking of that post the other day and regretting posting it to my
Oh
blog.
no.
I was like, anyone who knows me for any length of time will know I did not stick to this.
Oh, you didn't stick to it. Oh goodness.
No.
I thought that was so impressive. I was reading. I was like, wow, my gosh.
Oh my goodness. So when you're used to not getting anything done, you can try to take a hairpin turn and crack the whip on yourself. It'd be like, well, I'm going to go straight from getting nothing done to suddenly being really disciplined and getting some use out of every hour of my day. And of course, it works for the first week, and then you don't get back onto it. And you kind of don't want to because, who really wants to, you feel like it's a step beyond routine.
Yeah.
It's almost, it's in the name of finishing what you want to finish.
Yeah.
It almost becomes a type of self-torture.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So, like, when I started Fablebreakers, here's the origin story. I was going through, like, a weird time where, like, I wasn't getting anything done, and I was like, gosh, I gotta do something with my life. And I kind of, like, popped out of bed one day, and I was like, if I involve somebody else, like, I think that'll kind of kick my butt into gear because I'm responsible for them as well. Do you know what I mean?
Kind of, yes.
You had accountability.
Yeah. I found, because I've definitely tried to do that too. I thought, well, if you're stuck in a depression, for instance, you think, oh, why can't I get out of bed at a normal time? And then you realize, oh, wait, well, if someone's expecting me to be somewhere, I know that I can at least be up and be there because someone's expecting me to be there. And, that doesn't solve every morning, but you at least know that it works. But if I'm in the building process, and if I'm past the brainstorming stage, but not quite yet into actually making the thing, it really helps to have a second person.
Yeah.
You remember when I did Chrome, that story about the robot, that was a thing that my friend and I had started throwing the concept back and forth between states as pen pals when we were probably tweens.
Really?
So I'm talking, yes, like 20 years ago. When we finally returned to this, I thought, okay, Jason, I've got this idea. If you want, you can do the artwork and I'll do the writing. And the basic premise is we put in the time, but we don't give ourselves time to think. We just do it.
Yeah.
No opportunity to second guess yourself. Part of why I did it this way, live online, was that, once you post that you're going to be doing a thing for 2 solid hours, you kind of have to keep posting stuff.
Yep.
The reason I say it was less about accountability for me was that there's a different engagement level. If you at least feel like you're being watched, you're going to be a little more focused than you were before.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think that was the main thing for me.
I think it's important to just be transparent about what we're creating too. And then as we're putting things out, like, people may get interested, but there's that whole thing about being honest with your art and not really caring too much necessarily about how many views or likes you're getting. And Minty brought that up as well too, because she, our first guest from episode 1, she has like a pretty big following, and but one thing that I love about her, she doesn't let it get to her, her head in any way, and she's like, her art is still very consistent regardless of, who's looking at it. So, but it is a good thing to post, and I don't want to just, dismiss social media as something that's like, stupid or flaky, but like, because it's so, I think it's so important to artists and creatives nowadays. Like, that's how you get your work out there. So it shouldn't be disregarded in any way, but it definitely shouldn't be like the main reason why we create.
Yeah.
So, Jeremy, what advice would you give to a fellow artist or writer who thinks that they've hit the last wall that they can hit? If they were like me in that stage where I thought writing was a house that I was locked out of, or the wardrobe is broken and they can't get in, what do you think they can do to pull themselves out of that place?
Yeah, that's huge. And I do have thoughts about this. It goes back again to the problem, the real problem of trying to make something publishable every time you put pen to paper. Because you can call yourself a writer and that be an identity statement. Call yourself a novelist and that's more of a commercial statement. And what I mean in making that distinction is if you write because that's part of who you are, then it doesn't have to be a performance. It doesn't have to be something that faces any criticism. You can make it without even the intent to show it to anybody. But if you're a writer who doesn't even journal, then you're probably going to be facing a good deal of disappointment. You're going to be thinking, I wish I wrote, but I feel like I never am happy with what I write when I write. So I'm not even going to bother today. I'm not even going to bother this week, this month. Next thing you know, you just sporadically do this thing that you identify as part of who you are, not just what you do. And so what I would say is live your life. And part of that's a nice vague statement. Let me
I'll write that down.
That'll do you. There. All right, we're finished. No, what I mean when I say live your life is I've had opportunities from time to time to set aside large blocks of time to work on my writing. And so little gets done when I set aside large blocks of time to do writing.
It's kind of what Carly was doing when she was writing her first. She said she was setting aside this time and kind of putting pressure on herself to get it done. Yeah.
And it's you go into it thinking, yeah, this is going to be a great use of my time. And there's a reason that you slow to a stop when you do it that way. When I said that writing is translation work, that fiction is translation work, you have to be having life experiences in order to have something to translate. It's like, for instance, you could be the most shy person who prefers to spend time by yourself. You're still going to need to have close relationships. And if you're not touching base with at least those people, you're going to run on empty. You can't run on empty and still produce art. That's the way it works.
Yeah.
When you think about how much our being relies on taking in stimuli, then when you apply that to creative block, it starts to make sense. Yeah. When you feel inspired, it's because there's an overflow. Where does an overflow come from?
Yeah.
Not a vacuum.
True. Yeah.
I guess my advice would be for people who have hit these roadblocks is to just think about why the roadblock's there. Question what's not working, because something has made you stop creating. And think about why that is. Take a step back, consider your process, consider that maybe what you're doing at that moment is not the thing you should be doing at that moment. Maybe your project needs more time to be developed before you can work on it. And know that it's not you that's the problem. It's just you're not supposed to be doing this thing at this time, and you have to realize it. Just chill out. That's what I would say to past me.
I'd love to mention this real quick if I could. Sometimes the reason for your creative block is going to be harder to pin down, but sometimes it's because you're disorganized. And I'm going to say, find out first and foremost, what does your character want? And is the heart's desire of your character something that has really come from your own experience, or one that you feel intimately, maybe because you've known somebody who's gone through the same thing? Really see if this is something that's coming from you, or if it's just something you find interesting as a spectator about. Because you might have a hard time getting into something that's not really coming from true experience. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't follow through that story, but that will kind of show you what direction of research you need to take to properly prepare to go into it. But recognize what the essence of it. Know where you're starting and where you mean to end with it, and know the conflict. Because if you at least know those things, that's half your story to begin with, and then you're going to know if you're really in love with the story. And you should, from that point, be able to tell if a lot of the snags you're running into are because you don't know how to tell that story, or because you just need to process it with a friend.
All right, cool. So thank you, Jeremy, for reflecting with us on the topic of creative block, art block, writer's block, whatever you want to call it. I hope that this discussion is meaningful to someone who feels that they've lost their creative spark or kind of lost their wardrobe to Narnia or hit a wall. I hope it helps someone out.
If you'd like to follow Jeremy online, and you should, then you can find him at his website, jeremyloomis.com, where you can find his series about writing along with his personal musings about the creative process. Also be sure to check out his webcomic, Quiet House, at quiethouse.thecomicseries.com. We'll be putting all of his links in the description of this video.
And if you're into busting up more creative fables, then you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Tumblr, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, all at Fablebreakers. And that'll do it for this week's episode. Until next time, I'm your host, Jake Romano.
And I'm Carly Racklin, and you've been listening to Fablebreakers.